Welcome to the CSBP Fertilisers Grow Better podcast, sharing knowledge with growers on leading crop nutrition, sustainable agriculture and other issues impacting the agricultural industry.
G'day everyone, welcome to the CSBP Grow Better podcast. I'm Johnston and I'm joined here today by Scott Nelson, who's our Central Sales Support Manager at CSBP Fertilisers, going to tell us everything we need to know about managing our nitrogen requirements this year. Dozer, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. Good to be here. Good to get here a couple of days before Easter, get this job done, and then we can have a good break.
Look, we've been really looking forward to you joining us on the show. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at CSBP and your journey at the company so far?
Yeah, so I've been with CSBP now coming up 13 years, I think. So a long journey, longest time I've spent in one single company. So I started off as an area manager down in Narrogin back in 2009 or 2010. So I spent a few years there, then took off down to Esperance, down to the lovely beaches down there, and spent a good chunk of time down there. And an opportunity came up to come back to Kwinana and take on the agronomy job. So agronomy is something that I really liked as I was working with CSBP in the field. So I took a job on as agronomy lead and I've done that for 3 years. And then just lately, with the new general manager coming in, sort of asked if I was interested to take on a central sales support role, which started in February, and it's been a really good challenge for the last couple of months.
And so before you joined CSBP, what got you interested in agriculture? How did you get into the game?
Come from a family farm, so we had a farm down at Noman's Lake and spent a lot of time on there, probably a lot of time doing odds and sod jobs after I left school, so crutching and driving trucks and spreading fertiliser. So did that and moved into Elders. So did a stint with Elders, went in there of all things to be a wool buyer at the time. Good thing that didn't happen. So I got into merchandise and sort of, we sold the farm in about 07, 08, and it was a good opportunity to stay involved in agriculture. Really enjoyed it, loved being in the outdoors and loved dealing with growers out there in the field.
What are the things that's, I guess, kept you with the company over the journey?
I think it's the good thing is there's a challenge, so where there's always something new to learn and grow your expertise in certain fields, and it's just good to see that you spend some time with the grower and see them implement some of the things you've asked them to do, and they get the benefit from it, and you get some really good friendships. So I've got friends all the way from Mullewa, where I was with Elders, all the way down to Esperance across the state. So that interaction, and the good thing is that we can still, at the end of the day, sit down, have a beer and joke about the footy and have some good times.
It's really nice. As part of your new role, your central sales support role, a critical element is, I guess, keeping your ear to the ground in terms of feeding through messages from what's happening out there in the field. Yep. We're recording this in April. It's the 13th of April today. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're hearing in terms of what's happening in terms of seeding, in terms of weather? Feels like it's been a bit of a mixed bag out there. Some people had a bit of rain, some people not so much.
Look, it's probably, it's been a funny odd year. We've had a really, really dry summer. So we usually bank on a lot of summer rain to fill the profile up, and we'll carry it through to help us. But as saying this on the 13th, we've just, I've got off talking to a couple of growers in Esperance who have just received up to 6 inches overnight. So the season's changed pretty quick and the profile's filled up in a few areas. And you talk through that sort of eastern wheat belt through Merredin, Ben Cubbon, they've had some really good force from about the 20th of March. So we've really seen the sentiment of the season change as we've seen profiles fill up, full of water. A good opportunity to get a good knockdown. In a year like this year, it's always great to get a knockdown, even though the price of chemicals isn't cheap. It's cheaper to use the cheaper ones than it is to use the in-season. So a really good opportunity to get a knockdown out there, and growers are taking that opportunity to start seeding. So we've been moving earlier and earlier and earlier. I think we seeded our trials the earliest we did last year in the first week of April, but we've had growers seeding 20th, 30th of March. So there's a fair bit of canola in the ground already.
And it still feels like though things are ramping up. Like down in Kwinana, we've seen dispatches kind of just ramp. I mean, we're still not quite at the peak of seeding yet.
No, and look, there's people that go early regardless and get a good chunk in, but still the cereal is still our biggest crop type that will go in. So wheat and barley. So a few people might be a bit bitten from frosts and going seeding too early that we saw last year, so they'll be delaying. So we'll start really seeing that that ramp up, and I think we'll start seeing probably a big demand for fertiliser really kick in around that Anzac Day, which is what we usually say is a normal break, if there's such a thing as normal anymore.
And is there any word on changes to people's programs or to their rotations? Are people going big? Are they a bit gun shy because of the market conditions at the moment?
Well, market conditions are definitely driving what growers are doing. We're hearing a lot more canola going in this year than probably what was first thought, and probably at the cost of some cereal crops, especially barley and oats. We're seeing some pullback on that and going into canola. With the good rains we've received, especially, there's some fallow paddocks that people are like, the price is too expensive for fertiliser and inputs this year, so they said they were going to go fallow. But after filling up the profile with 60, 70 mils of rain, some growers are taking this opportunity to seed some canola and some low inputs into that. But with the cost of canola, they can really make a profitable decision if it pays off, with probably not a massive yield that they need to get back to get that off. Talk with inputs is obviously, growing your own N. So we have seen, some increasing to lupins and peas, etc. But, like all things, it's good in theory. You have to deal with that at harvest time next year and try to sell that and make a profit off of it. So some people have taken this early break to switch some of them out now back into canola.
So overall, you'd say, I guess coming off, what was a record year for WA overall, you'd still say sentiment's pretty strong?
I think we will. I don't know if we'll see as much as we saw going last year. I think we'll see that come back a little bit, but I still think they would have an average to slightly above average crop put in. And also with livestock pricings and an early break and some good sheep feed, some people might take the opportunity to run more sheep, which is good.
Turning to, I guess, the theme of today's discussion, which is really nitrogen and what people should be doing to manage their nitrogen requirements this season. Can you talk us through, I guess, what are the big factors that people should be keeping in mind from a maybe upstream and downstream perspective?
Look, there's no beating around the bush that we're seeing decile 10 nitrogen prices. We thought 2008 was bad, and we looked back at the price guide from 2008 in a meeting about 2 days ago, and we actually wished we could have some of that pricing now. So pricing's very high, but offsetting that is the grain price. So if we need nitrogen, it's still going to be profitable if we can, secure some of that forward-looking pricing at that high level. So that's a real big challenge. So people don't want to spend the money; they want to hold off and buy at the last minute. But that leads to other issues such as supply. So I'm sure other people in other podcasts you do will talk about this in a lot more detail. But the world market's changed. A couple of players aren't supplying, so supply's tight. Making sure that we've got enough supply in when growers need it is a bit of a struggle, especially with high cost inventory. And just COVID and truck drivers, getting phone calls from old truckie mates saying, do you want to come back and drive a truck? They're just not out there like they used to be. So we're seeing delays in that. So it's about making sure we're making good decisions, putting the nitrogen on where we need it, not putting it on where we don't need it. So the most expensive fertiliser, the fertiliser that doesn't work, and one that you don't need. So making good decisions, getting all the information, and making a few slight changes to what we do. I still think we can be profitable at the end of the year.
So you talk about getting the right information there. What exactly do you mean by that? Like what should growers be doing to make sure they are getting the right information to manage their nitrogen well?
So it's about information. Soil sampling, plant sampling, those type of information. Now, it's not perfect. We know there's variability, but at least it's something to start with. So we're really asking people to soil sample. Now, we get into April now, which is probably very late, but we have seen good numbers go through the lab. There's been some delays because of the late season where everyone's sampling late, but that's a really good starting point. The good thing about that is it tells us what's in the soil. It also tells us those other limitations that are pretty important when it comes to nitrogen, because even though we're focusing on nitrogen, there's a lot of interactions with other nutrients. So making sure we got the whole picture sorted is a real key thing right now. So some of the early facts we're seeing in soil sampling is that levels in the soil are low. So that's a dry summer, no mineralisation.
Is that a carryover from last year? I mean, can that big crop last year impact that?
Definitely, and that's the other point is we were probably slightly unders on the nitrogen we applied last year. We grew big crops. We probably saw that in some of the protein levels we saw through in wheat, that ASW, AP2. There wasn't a lot of hard wheat. So yeah, a lot of that nitrogen was exported out in the system. And probably on top of that, a big yield is that we also got a massive stubble level carried over from last year. So, 4 or 5 tonne wheat crops, you're looking at 7 or 8 tonne stubble left out there in the paddock, which is tying up any of that Nen that might have mineralised out of this last rainfall. So while it might be available come later in the season, the fact of the matter is right now there's not going to be a lot of available N for that crop to take up when it's going to germinate and growing in that early stages and setting that yield potential.
Okay, so I've heard, make sure you understand what the impact of last season could be, and make sure you're soil testing and hopefully most of the people listening to this and watching this have already done those things already.
Yeah.
What's next after that then? Like, what do people have to be doing to make sure that the crop comes out of the ground with as buoyant as it possibly can?
Yeah. So it's about knowing what your sort of your worst case scenario is a really good starting point. We've seen yields increase over the last 5-10 years, and our long-term averages are a lot higher than what we probably aim for a lot of times. So it's about knowing what your sort of minimum input is going to be, and then making sure that we're doing the right steps to get that into the crop in the most efficient ways known that we know about. So, example, down in Esperance, for example, some of those country long-term average has been 2.8 tonnes. So, making sure that we're putting enough nitrogen, and that's through banding Flexi-N, so we're getting away from that high stubble load in the crop. A lot of the trials will show it's most efficient is getting it up front and putting it down the ground and in the ground underneath the crop, and letting the crop take that up, because you're taking a lot of factors out of the play. So that's rainfall after applying it to get it into the root zone, making sure it's not tied up in that stubble, and making sure that you've actually got product on farm, which is the massive one now, is that, a lot of Flexi-N tanks are full, you've got that product on farm now, so you might as well use it and then open up that opportunity to fill up again and use if the season allows.
So on that point, filling up again and use if the season allows, are people out there now thinking around their top-up nitrogen requirements and what's going to be coming in July and August?
I think so, and we've got to start talking about it, because that's the decision we're making now, is to purchase those and start scheduling those boats to arrive here. So the more we know, the better we can get of having that product in Kwinana in our regional depots for when you want it. So talking through those things and maybe, not committing, you might not have to commit 100%, but at least be talking with your area manager for when you're ready to pull the trigger, that we've got ample time to get it there.
Yeah, so our account management team would be out talking to our customers now about what their late season nitrogen requirements are going to be.
Definitely, and look, even if they haven't, we ask you to call up and just ask the question. There's a lot of water to go under the bridge for this season and where we end up, come harvest this year. But communicating and knowing where we sit and judging what you want to do is a really good starting point. You've
just come out of a role where you've been focused on agronomy for the last few years. And you talked about soil sampling before. Is there anything else that people should be thinking about?
It's really the start of the whole process and really working through all those information gathering components that we can do through the year and making a good decision based on the information you've got. So, plant sampling is the number one, and now plant sampling is a service that we offer as CSBP. I don't know why we don't do a lot more of it, because it's a lot more exciting driving around a crop when it's growing, when it's cold, rather than digging up dirt when it's 45 degrees and blowing a gale. So we really should do that. And one of the reasons that we find growers don't do it is that they just tell me levels are good. And I keep coming back to, if we've done a soil sample and we've done a fertiliser recommendation and the plant testing says your levels are good, that should probably be a good thing, because it means that you've made the right decision by applying fertiliser. So it's about doing a really good plant sampling job just to quantify or find out whether the plans that you've made are doing. And it's good to actually find out, because you might find that odd site or odd area that is not performing like you expected, and it can help guide those questions of why that isn't happening. So, and then even though soil samples might be high, there might be another reason. So if you go down this pathway with applying a lot of nitrogen to a site that you think is K sufficient, and plant to tests are showing that it's majorly K deficient, then you've basically throwing that money down the drain.
So we've talked about understanding what's in your soil, and then making sure you've got a real good idea of what's in the plant as it's coming up. And that's particularly relevant for then making decisions around your nitrogen later in the season. Are there other things that growers should be thinking about, other options that they might have to be making those decisions?
Yeah, and once you've got that information, you've got a soil sample, you've got a plant sample that tells you that nothing else is limiting, it really opens up the opportunity for Detect and Detect Plus, which are a couple of other services we do, which is scanning and real-time and analysis of the crop. So the good thing about delaying these to this time of the year is that we've had 2 or 3 months of rainfall. We're starting to get a little bit more confident about what the season potential is. We can start really fine-tuning that nitrogen with confidence, because we know that nothing else is limiting. And then we can target that nitrogen to where you're going to get the best return on that investment. So it's not about putting all your nitrogen up front, it's about making sure you can get through to a certain point of year and really fine-tuning that nitrogen inputs late in the year to make sure you can maximise the return on that investment.
But again, I guess the countervailing point to that at the moment might be, are people going to be able to get that nitrogen late season if there's no good doing the Detect Plus if you haven't got the nitrogen late season to put it on?
Yeah, and that's always a risk, and that goes back to what product you use and what you're willing to risk as a grower. And that, even though we sell both urea and Flexian, that's the beauty of that product, Flexian. We can send it out to you, put it in your tank. If the opportunity arises, you can spray it out. If it doesn't, just leave it there for next year. Now, the price is obviously, you buy the price the market dictates at the time, but that's a risk that you've got to manage. There's no one saying that we know where pricing is going to be in 12 months' time. So it might be a really, really good decision. It might be a wrong decision. But the fact is, if you need it and it's profitable to apply it at that time of the year, then you're going to get good return on that investment.
So if there are people out there who want to hear a bit more about the stuff you're talking about today, whether it's plant sampling, whether it's CSBP Detect Plus, whether it's just thinking about, holy hell, how do I get my hands on some nitrogen this year? What should they do? Your
account manager is the number one point of call. So everyone's got one. Pick up your phone and give them a call, flick them a text. We're talking to our account managers and pushing them to start, getting on farm and being proactive and contact you guys. So and push comes to shove. If you get to that point, there's always a Kwinana number to call. I'm sure that one of the lovely people in the front staff will forward your phone call onto someone to give you a hand.
You talked there about the benefits of bounding Flexian and getting it in there up front. Can you tell us a little bit more about what people should be thinking about and what kind of some of those benefits are and what some of the risks might be as well?
Well, it's always a big one, is that by banding nitrogen up front, you're rolling the dice and putting your money up front without knowing what's going to happen afterwards. It's always a risk, and we should take into consideration a lot of things like where you're located. Are you in Merredin where it's a drier year and you may not get the rain, or you're in the South Stirlings where it's on a sandy and you might get a lot of rain. So it's about matching your banded Flexian rate to match the scenario where you are, the location, but also your own personal risk profile. So a lot of growers, if they're targeting a big yield, will probably be a bit more risky and put more up front, especially if the chances of leaching losses are low. Whereas, down to the South Stirlings, again, like last year, we tried some rates quite high early and we just got massive amounts of rain on them. We lost that. So it's about managing that risk, and taking that into consideration over a long time. One thing we find with talking with growers is that last year is very, very prevalent in their head. They can remember what happened last year. But if you haven't had a leaching rain in 10 years, the law of averages state that you may not get a leaching rain. That odd one that comes out of the around the corner and smashes you with a big rainfall event, that's just life sometimes. So.
And we did see a big spread in nitrogen use efficiencies last year. It can just be a gamble, right?
Oh, and that's right. We saw down at Arthur River, 10%. We saw up at Una 70% nitrogen use efficiency from banding nitrogen. So there's so much variability. I think you just got to play the long game and say that 9 times out of 10 by banding nitrogen, I'm going to get the best result out of it. So I'll take the 9 out of 10 and that one. Unfortunately, the good thing is that if it's rained enough to leach it, it means that there's a lot more rain in the system, hopefully a higher yield potential anyway. So.
And we should just take that opportunity to give the CSBP Ag Insights and CSBPresults.com.au websites a bit of a plug. All that trials information that Dozer was just referencing is available on those resources. We've talked today a lot about broadacre cropping and nitrogen requirements for that. I guess there's also a bunch of livestock producers in the state, and of course people running mixed enterprises who will want to be thinking about nitrogen requirements for pastures as well. What should be at the front of their mind at the moment?
Well, it's about the need for feed. If you need feed, it's cheaper to grow your own by a mile, and especially where we're seeing grain prices, hay prices move to now. It's bloody expensive to be chucking food down their throats. So we really need to know what's your need for feed. Are your pasture paddocks going to stay pasture? Yes, we may have had a really good clover germination. Is that going to survive? We know clover's quite a poor grower, potentially early in the season, and through that winter periods, we don't get really good growth rates out of it. You just really see that spring flush. Now, I'm not saying that clover pastures aren't an important facet of growers' rotation, but really the opportunity to target those grassy paddocks, or alternatively scratching in some cereals and driving production and really good growth rates over autumn and spring to make sure, A, we can feed the sheep, but then take that grazing pressure off those pasture paddocks and make sure we can really get them established and performing for that back end of the season.
So would people be applying nitrogen now?
Yes, they will. So there's a couple of opportunities depending on your soil testing. We still reckon soil testing. So last year we did that in Arthur River where we soil tested. We had a trial looking at banded and post applications. But looking at the soil test data, we should never have banded nitrogen there because we had so much in the soil. So knowing your soil levels, if you've got good rates and you don't need it, then probably don't rely on what's in the soil profile. But where you need it, 100 litres can grow a lot more feed, and we're sort of talking application rates, making sure that they're high enough to make sure you get the good growth responses. So if we don't go high enough, we don't get really good growth responses. So in that sort of 0 to 70 litres of Flexium, which is up to about sort of 20 kilos of nitrogen, we sort of get growth rates around that 5 to 8 kilograms of dry matter per kilogram of N. So look, that's probably at those rates, you're probably looking at around about 400-500 kilos. But when you increase that application up to that sort of 100 litres and higher again, we've seen growth rates jump. So in the trial at Arthur River, we saw growth rates jump up to 25 kilograms per kilogram of N. So, a 40 litre application grew us, a tonne of feed, which is another, 500 or 600 kilograms of dry matter production, which in these days is carrying another head, another DSE, which with the current price of wool, current price of meat, means that you can carry more stock, which means that you can make more profit per hectare.
Really good message, I think, for us to finish on there. So look, Dozer, thank you very much for joining us today. If we had to summarise, I think we're saying we know there's a lot of noise in the markets, but make sure you've got the right information you need to make good decisions for your nitrogen this year. You get that right information through soil testing, through plant testing, through using CSBP Detect Plus, but most of all, get in touch with our team and make sure you're getting the advice from them. Have I got that about right?
Spot on, mate. We're always there to help you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the CSBP Grow Better podcast. Remember to subscribe, rate and review the CSBP Grow Better podcast on whatever podcast platform you're using, and follow us at CSBP Fertilisers on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. And we look forward to speaking to you soon. Cheers.
All right, thank you, Gray.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the CSBP Grow Better podcast. For more information about CSBP, please visit csbp-fertilisers.com.au or connect with us on social media at CSBP Fertilisers on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. This podcast is provided as general information only. The content of this podcast is not a recommendation and has been prepared without taking your objectives or circumstances into account. Before acting on the content of this, you should consider its appropriateness to your circumstances and seek independent advice.